with that, I think we're just about ready to start moving into our deep dive topic, which is basically taking a deeper look at the racism and policing in America, what it means to us today, where we've been, where we're going, and just quite a few different things. And one of the first people I want to bring on to help talk about that is Brandon, who helped us put together some relevant statistics, which I'm going to have to uh, push back a bit on at some point, which I did not forewarn Brandon about, so he is just being informed of this, as you all are. But somebody's made an interesting point to me about the statistics, and I think it's only fair to put that to use that context in the discussion. But Brandon, let me just go ahead and get you on here. All right. So go ahead and say hello and tell us a little bit about what you were researching leading up to today's show.
Well, you sprung this on me. So I've been researching police brutality statistics in America, specifically as it relates to race and uh, punishment for cops who commit these acts of brutality. Of course, before I go any further, it's worth foregrounding that these statistics are very, very loose because there is no national standard for reporting police violence to the FBI. It's a voluntary thing. Of the 18,000 police departments in the United States, they all voluntarily put forth their own data to the FBI. So when you look at the data they voluntarily give, you get one number. When you look at the data being tracked by other places, nonprofits, you get a much higher number, sometimes three times as high. So it's worth always understanding that these numbers are very fluid, and we don't exactly have a exact number for police violence in America, which is something that James Comey, the head of the FBI, has called ridiculous. James Comey, the guy who came out in favor of Hillary Clinton uh, as being recklessly inept but not criminal, thinks that it's ridiculous that we don't have a national mandatory reporting system for our police shootings. So that's just a little background there.
Yeah, no, and that touches pretty much mostly what I wanted to address about when we talk about statistics regarding this. Is that, as you mentioned, we are working from a limited data set, and so
Yeah.
one of the issues that some people that try to look at this from a strictly analytical point of view have pointed out and have some justification in is that it's hard for us to make any draw many conclusions or uh, to build narratives around results of individual or particular studies, whether they show one thing or another. Like I know there's a lot of stories going around about how white people are actually getting shot more, and then there was another article going and other studies going around showing that conclusively showing or people were interpreting it as conclusively showing that black people were being shot more, and so that I know one of the things that we talk about a lot on Project Sanity is knowing what statistics actually say. What is a study actually telling us versus what we're interpreting? Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to say to that. The idea that we don't make it mandatory for police departments to report this says volumes in and of itself. It says that we inherently trust the police department to be doing the right thing to the point in which we don't feel like it's necessary to have a sort of federal oversight of them. And this applies to police shootings. This applies to the standards for each police department in terms of what they require for hiring, whether it be psychological tests or whether they want a bachelor's degree, whether they want 30 credits in criminology, whether they want some sort of background in social work. Without this sort of federal standard, we give a lot of leeway to local departments to do whatever they want to do when it comes to that. So that would be my first pushback against that. Like that sort of lack of standard is evidence in and of itself of a problem that we have with trusting cops perhaps too much.
Yes, I think that that's an excellent point, and I think part of the problem that we see in the discussions that we are facing around these topics is that we want to limit them to particular incidences that aren't uh, complete representations of what is actually being discussed in large. And so I think how we see that manifest in one way is with, as you mentioned, the police simply not providing these statistics in the first place is something that we should be talking about before we get to the details of any particular incident. That like
Well,
and that by talking about when we get to by going to the incidents that we've already skipped several important steps, but that being one of them about what went wrong before we got to where we're at. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, just to talk to the statistics, what you said, like, are more white people shot by the cops than minorities of any type, of altogether minorities? Absolutely. White people, Caucasians make up 78%, 75% of our country's racial demographics, but they are shot disproportionately less to that. So you'll say, if you look at how it breaks down, white people make up, say, three-fourths of American racial demographics, but they are only shot at one half. So the other one half is shot at twice the rate of what white people are shot at in America. So when you look at, for black people, that means 6.6 black people are shot per million. For Native Americans, that number is close to that as well. It's like 6.4. And when you look at the chances of being shot when black, it is twice as high. So if you are black in America, you are twice as likely to be shot as a white person in America. Same for Native Americans. Uh, if you are black, male, and young, so young as defined by between the ages of 18 and 25, you are 9 times more likely to be shot than any other group, except for Native Americans. Again, it's worth mentioning because we often forget the other. Native Americans are often made even more invisible just by their lack of numbers. But that number, it holds steady for them as well. And it's gotten to the point where if you are a young black male in America, 1 in 65 young deaths of young black males is the result of police shootings. Like that is a high amount of that is a high cause of death amongst police shootings. I mean, amongst black youth.
Yeah, I think one of the things that carries a little bit off of what we talked about earlier in the show with Jessa about their people being fed up and letting people know that this isn't acceptable is even with the limited statistics that we do have and the limited investigations into the police departments like Cleveland, what we are finding is that it's happening too much regardless of race or any of these other it shouldn't be considered acceptable. So the anger and the rage that we see within specific communities who feel like it's targeting them more egregiously than others is almost just supplementary to the idea that these issues are so large and so prevalent and so obvious that without the particular nuances that are being added by this group, it still should everybody else should be just as angry, and that they're not about things like the police not reporting, or if we look at police union contracts, about them not having to, like, if they get in a car accident, they don't get drug tested or alcohol tested. That if you did anything, if you were driving a forklift and you ran into a pallet full of pillows, you would end up getting drug tested. But if you're driving a police car, you run into somebody and you kill them, there's a high likelihood that your union protects you from getting drug tested. Those types of things should be things that we should all be upset about, that happen even before these incidences, which is what's gotten people so upset that they're in traffic and doing these types of things. And sorry to rant a bit, but I think you were following what I was saying there.
Yes, of course. But this wants to say something.
Yeah. You said Nis?
Oh, yeah, I would just ask, so when we see these numbers, aren't they hiding some really grotesque facts? So you say that Native Americans and African Americans are at about the same rate for getting shot and killed. But when you look at the percentage number, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of non-Hispanic blacks are 12.2% of the population, whereas the percentage of non-Hispanic American Native Americans are 0.7%. When you become that small a segment of society, the odds of running into a cop must be astronomical. Like, doesn't those numbers somehow hide that Native Americans are being targeted even more disproportionately because of their enormously small population number?
I mean, we have a long history of reservation culture and the way we treat Native Americans on reservations, especially cops in surrounding towns going into reservations. But I believe Adair, who was part Native American, wants to speak more of this than I could probably ever do justice to. So I should probably let him do that.
Sounds like a good idea. It looks like he wants to talk, but he has to unmute himself first.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Momentarily.
Okay. So here's the thing that this entire statistic thing is really steeped in, quite frankly, racism. Here's the thing you have to understand about Native Americans and what it means to be Native American in this country is this idea of a blood quantum. In America, you had two distinct groups during, let's say from the founding of this nation to about the Civil War, right? Two distinct groups that their blood determined everything. Native Americans and black folks. Black folks being slaves at the time, it would make much more economic sense for the United States to say, if you have one drop of African blood in your veins, you are black in this country. And at the same time to say, well, to be Native American, to be really Native, you must meet a certain level of blood quantum. I think it's something like 1/16 of your genetic code must be Native American, which, frankly, you can't actually tell how much of your genetic code is what. That's a whole myth, but that's another story. These numbers, this erasure of Native American people is helped by the use of a lot of these garbage statistics. This idea that if you're not a certain percentage, you couldn't really be Native. Though there's many black natives out there. If you're black in this country and you've been here for quite a long time, your family's intermixed with that community. You have got as many ties as, you should have more ties to the community. We should not be leaving them by themselves to do their own thing, because we commit to that erasure as well. But this idea of statistics in America, especially as it pertains to police shootings, are so steeped in racism, it's staggering. It is absolutely mind-numbing how racist these institutions are with the way that they count statistics, with the way we count, well, who's really Native American in this country and who's not. Because the fewer people that qualify as blood quantum natives, the fewer people have to be counted. The fewer people have to be respected in regards to the treaties that the United States government has signed with tribes. The more folks that you shoot, here's the thing about it. Police officers go into these black communities, they shoot young black men. We are weaponized, right? Just the very fact that I exist, that Brandon exists, that Richard exists, when we step outside of our homes, America has weaponized our bodies in the same way that they've weaponized Native American bodies. And so there's no reason to count us. There's no reason to sit up here for folks to be like, well, why should we? It goes back to this idea of what was being spoken earlier to the, well, everybody should be outraged. But they're not, because of privilege, because it doesn't affect these communities the way it affects ours. I'm on Facebook bombarded all the time by people telling me, well, statistically, white people are shot more, the actual numbers, the raw numbers, white people are shot more than anybody else. Well, you're damn right. You make up the majority of the population of this country. You also, by extension, are going to commit the majority of the crimes and therefore should have majority interactions with police, but that's not true. Here's what is true. That as a black person in America, you are much more likely to meet your end at the hands of a police officer, and that a doggone thing is going to be done about it. Because this entire police institution is brought out of slavery, it's brought out of racism, it's been brought to the 21st century. Most people know that most police organizations started as runaway slave catching roles.
Yeah, I think you're cutting up a little bit there, but I think you bring up a really important point that I've been using in some interactions on Twitter and elsewhere about how there's this burden to prove that the police have been policing in a racist way on Black Lives Matter or on people that are saying that something needs to be changed. What I want to know is, when did the police stop policing in a racist way? When did that happen? Because until you can tell me that happened, then I don't think I need to go back over it and figure out when they started again.
Yep. Yeah, but, I mean, people have been told this idea, this fantasy that police is this objective, neutral force that that has throughout the ages always been like that, and it's the way that it's been in all democratic countries. But I mean, the police force started as the extended arm of the sheriff, and the sheriff originally was a position of basically a head crusher to keep peasants in line in the old nobilities and feudalistic societies in Europe. And that position was then brought over to America when the colonization happened here. So when the police forces were established here, it was as an extended arm of the law, of the privileged, not as an extended arm of the citizenry. And then at some point in the 1940s or 50s, someone decided to put "to protect and serve" on the side of a police car, and they did the show. They made some cop shows, and all of a sudden, police were the ideology of neutrality and objectivity. So this fantasy that was sold to us through film in the 50s and 60s somehow stuck with us in an idea about police being these neutral, objective, nice guys. But police historically have never been that. And so I would completely agree with the way that you turn the question upside down. When did they exactly stop being racist?
Yeah, and so that to me, and one of the responses I got was, oh, when the Civil Rights Act passed, and and that's when things stopped being like the person I was arguing with said that all racism had ended in the '60s. It was the position that they had took.
Mm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
when the interaction at one point, they were like, I mentioned, it was like housing discrimination, and I posted something from 2015, and they were like, oh, well, that's illegal. So what I meant was, legally, you guys are equal in every way. And it's like, okay, well, that's I will get you in here just momentarily, Brandon. And then legally, and so then my suggestion was, well, even by that metric, the year you gave me, 1964, the Fair Housing Act didn't pass until '68. So even by your own metrics, and this is somebody who admonished me for my not knowing history, as not knowing why racism ended in the '60s. And so during their lecture, they did this, and this is a frustrating thing, and I think Ben did an excellent job kind of encapsulating a lot of it. There's a video shortened up, and you can watch this whole show, but about how racism is exhausting, and I think you could hear it in Adair's voice. You can probably hear it in mine sometimes, probably, and I don't know. Brandon's able to remain more calm, I think, than many people, but it's exhausting, it's tiring, it's frustrating. But beyond that, I'll get you in here, Brandon, to say what it is that you wanted to say.
I mean, I think there is merit in sort of being able to separate racist laws that are inherently racist in and of themselves, like slavery, like Jim Crow legislation, from laws that were made to be codedly racist. So the 60s saw a lot of laws emerge that were basically just hassle-black laws. So you see, like, or what they're called is quality of life laws. So loitering, vagrancy, some of them in the South get crazy. I think there's one Southern law that is walking without a purpose, and they're really just there to allow a wide berth of interpretation of illegal behavior, so that it gives cops the sort of mask of the law to hassle African Americans, to hassle poor people, to hassle people of color who are, just minding their own business in society.
Absolutely, and I know we had Eric that was interested in opining, getting just some additional perspective in here about how he's seen the situation, and I know Eric has a unique perspective from I think any of the people that have spoken so far. So I want to go ahead and get you in here, Eric.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I'm obviously a white man, but I have an interracial son, and so I see all this happening, and I'm trying to decide, do I talk to him about this? His mom doesn't really, she doesn't want to discourage him from talking to the police, and me, it's really hard to decide what to do, and it feels like, it almost feels like it's not right to speak myself to him, because I don't fully understand, and I never will fully understand what it feels like to be a victim of racism, and so it's really difficult. And we have our production meetings, and I hear the conversations between all of you, and I think about my son, and I think about, wow, is this what he is going to have to experience? And that's a big reason that I'm so involved in the criminal justice fight is because of him, and that's what drives me. But it's really discouraging to think that I'm actually going to have that conversation with him. I'm going to have to tell my son, hey, watch out for the police. I'm not going to tell him to look at them as a resource. I'm going to have to tell him to watch out for them.
And I think that's an unfortunate situation that I think we all want to avoid being the reality. in that. And on that note, I guess I had a bit of a, and I hesitate to give this example for fear of people thinking that I'm minimalizing in some way, but as a way for some people who may not have experienced racism to kind of just put in like with dealing with prejudiced police or just overly aggressive police, regardless of whether it's because of the color of our skin or not. The feeling that I can try and relate it to that is more common among people that wouldn't have experienced that I think is somewhat similar is the feeling that you get if you're very attached to your cell phone or it's a very expensive one that you couldn't afford to replace, and you've misplaced it and it's not where you would think it was. And like not the after the first place that you check, after the second place that you check, but after the third place that you know it usually ends is when you lose it, and it's still not there. That anxiety that you feel, that's kind of like how I feel whenever a police officer pulls up behind me. That feeling of intense anxiety and that like I can't fix this situation and I don't know what's going to happen. Oh no, that feeling is that's one that I can kind of parallel to it, and I see that both Adair and Brandon want to comment on that, so I will get them in here. Go ahead, Brandon. You're unmuted at the moment.
Oh, so I want to address something that Adair said earlier, and also something you just said, and I also want to expand the conversation a little bit because I think that police generally and police shootings specifically are kind of a low-hanging fruit. What we really need to engage with is that this sort of racism is apparent in all of our institutions that we have established in America due to segregation, de facto segregation, like you said, fair housing, so redlining, so actually de jure segregation. Little communities, ghettos, colonies, little separate, basically states that are Black America that we send cops into, that we send teachers into, that we send doctors into, and they're supposed to civilize us. Like honestly, it's like that's what it is. Like it's you see the same sort of narrative coming all the way from slavery times through to like the colonization of Africa. This idea that we have to put law and order and educate the Black community, despite the fact that we have no real that we're not trying to integrate them in any real way. We're not trying to acknowledge their differences. We're not trying or our differences. We are just sending in people to civilize the natives of these communities, civilize the natives of Bedford-Stuyvesant, civilize the natives of Harlem. Like without that sort of attachment to community that just breeds an us versus them, or at least us and them mentality, a separation between the people in charge and the people who are being subjugated.
I think that's an excellent point. Adair, I know you wanted to get in there.
Can I interject?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Nisk, get in here.
On that? So actually, that simile, the parable that you just made there, the busing, taking people from poor neighborhoods and busing them to schools in affluent neighborhoods. That was also something done in colonial times, in which you would take Native Americans with you from America to England to civilize them, to teach them how to be proper Westerners, and you would do the same thing from the colonies. So I think the correlation is actually far greater than I thought at first.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't mean to cut Adair off because I want him to go because I know he has something to say about this. But, I mean, we are still working on this outmoded model of race and culture that has set aside Black people and Black communities as being inherently savage, inherently unable to be tamed, and they should be separate, and that we're just in a society. It's the sort of burden of society at large to tame the wildness of the Black body, of the brown body, by sending in police, by sending in teachers who, I mean, if statistics show, I think only 1 in 5 white people in America have Black people in their social circle. So there is not this sort of tie to the Black community that allows for any empathy to evolve. If there is just this is a place I go to work with these people who might as well be natives. Harlem might as well be Kabul. It's like certain parts of the Bronx might as well be Afghanistan for all the attachment that mainstream society, white society has to it in terms of empathy and humanization.
Yeah, if only Afghanistan or Kabul were creating hip hop tracks that were getting blasted everywhere else. Like they're able to use the music that comes out of that pain and commercialize a lot of that, but getting any deeper involved in the culture, I think, has been sorely lacking.
But idolization is not humanizing. It doesn't
Exactly.
breed empathy.
Exactly. And so, Adair, sorry we've been holding you out. I know you want to get in here, so go ahead and get your piece in.
I want to clarify something I said earlier, and I think Brandon actually led into how I wanted to move forward from there. When I said that if you're black in this country, at some point you've got Native American mixed into your family tree. That is true. But here's what is true about being Native, and here's something that I've learned quite recently. It's not about the blood for me that makes me Native. It's not about the percentage of genetic markers that are found typically in Native Americans that make me Native American. It's the engagement and the involvement in the culture. It's the culture that we're losing. It's the languages that we're losing. It's the identity of what it means to be Native that is being lost to time, not Native people themselves, though the statistics help out with that. So that's one of the things that I really think that Brandon touched on is empathy. That has to happen. If we're going to ever reach a post-racial society, there has to be empathy bred. Native Americans in particular, I will use this example because this is the one that I can speak to most poignantly. Native Americans have always been there for the black community. From the time we were brought over here in like 1628, or whatever, not 1628, 1728, something like that, whatever, we all know what it was around that time, brought over to America. Runaway slaves could go and assimilate into Native communities, and to this day, the Native community has stood up and has always been there for Black Lives Matter, has always had our back, and we need to have theirs. There's this level of empathy. There's an empathy between the communities. I can empathize with plights of Native Americans, even just speaking as a black man, and not as a man that is mixed. But I've also found that in these communities of color, I grew up with kids whose families were from Mexico, with kids whose families were from South Korea and Samoa, and Native kids, and growing up together, this level of empathy that we were able to develop because we lived in such close proximity is amazing to me. This idea that we didn't really care because we grew up, because your family was my family, because I learned your culture from such a young age, and I learned about who we were as people. To me, it was really shocking to move out of that area, move out of one of these projects, and move to an affluent middle-class neighborhood where nobody even knows their neighbor, where people don't have cookouts and celebrate diversity. I mean, it's shocking to me to see this level of, I don't want to know you. I need to be in, this is my cubicle, you stay in your cubicle. And I think we have to get rid of that narrative. We have to defeat that idea of this individualistic society. America cannot continue living on, well, you're you and we're us, so we have to stay separate. Nah, we have to come together, because that's when a lot of it's a class issue as well, not just an ethnic issue, but a class issue. Whereas poor people are purposely divided. We've seen the Southern strategy with Reagan saying, hey, you know what, we're going to bring the poor whites to our side, even though we're not going to help them out. I've got more in common with poor white folks than I do affluent people of color outside of the issues that are unique to our ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah,
other than that,
I think that's an important point that you bring up, and that I think seeing that in a variety of ways is also an important facet to focus on at some point. Brandon looks like he's trying to get in here, so I do want to get Brandon in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Adair, because he's really checking something important, like what is propping up this system of violence against brown and black bodies, and it is segregation. It was segregation. It was biological segregation when it came to race in the 1800s, where we said that black people, that's where it started. We said that black people are inherently different by their race, and now it is. I mean, that's still there, but now it is being propped up still by geographic segregation. We have homogenous communities that we treat differently, whose infrastructure, ranging from schools to hospitals to water treatment, reflects our valuation of black and brown bodies, and that is the biggest problem we have right now. These institutions are meant to cement and reflect and reaffirm two things: white supremacy, and the fact that white supremacy is based on merit and not some sort of just inherent bias towards whiteness that has been around since America has started.
And I think there's an important thing contextually when we talk about the history of European migration into the United States, in that before the British folks started coming, there were a lot of French people here that lived with the indigenous people and were accepted, as Adair mentioned, as black people are often accepted, and that so the we're kind of taught this notion, or it's slightly slipped into us, I should say, or whatever, that there's no way that Europeans and natives could have lived together. It was impossible. It was like, no, there were plenty of Europeans that were, and reasonably, and maybe perhaps Adair has more clarification about if there's some horror stories out there that I'm unaware of, but that the French generally lived in a much more amiable conditions alongside with Native Americans by simply not trying to destroy their culture.
Yeah, but I think segregation, what it does is it turns blackness, it turns Native Americans, it turns with Latin American immigrants into an intellectual pursuit. It turns them into an academic curiosity. It turns them into like a course you take in college to to fill out your humanities, to fill out your social science, to fill out your global studies prerequisite, and it doesn't empathize them. You can't teach empathy. You can't teach people Black Lives Matters with 1 month, the shortest month of the year, but that's just me being petty. You can't teach people Black Lives Matter by reminding them that black people invented peanut butter once a year for 18 years. The only way to teach people that Black Lives Matter, the only way you teach people intersectionality, the only way you teach people any of these things that involve thinking out of yourself and saying that there are people who are not me, whose problems are either just as valid as mine or worse, whose viewpoints on the world are equally of our equal merit to mine, and I should respect them and acknowledge them as being my equal, even if we're different. But we can't do that. I love the fact that we're getting a lot of media attention for Black Lives Matters, but that will not that's in-game stuff. Until we integrate schools, until we have 18 white children playing with 18 brown and black children, this problem is going to keep going on.
Or let's hope for 12 and 12 and get some manageable class sizes out there. Nis, I see Nis wants to get in here, so Nis. You're going to need to unmute, though, if we're going to hear you.
And that was because I have secret things I can't say. So, no, I was wanting to get in here about the segregation, because segregation started as a law in the South, and then that law got abolished, and then it turned into redlining, and it turned into ghettos, and it turned into highway spurs being plotted down through black neighborhoods, basically destroying them and splitting them up. But at what point did the segregation start to become voluntarily? The neighborhood I live in, I'm the only white guy here, and I can find 1,000 people in each direction that are not white, and I chose to live here because we like the house, we like the proximity to things, and it's affordable for us, and we simply refuse to let ourselves be dictated by our skin color. Now, it took us a while, but we've broken the ice somewhat with a couple of our neighbors, but we can't walk too far away from our street without getting the side eye, without getting the who are you, what are you doing here, when are the house prices going up, when are the cops coming and having your back and fucking me over. These are like the attitude we get met with. So at what point do you talk about segregation as something that is not just about what white society does to minorities, but also about minorities being pushed by economics, but also when they have to choose between poor neighborhoods, they don't choose to go to the poor white neighborhood necessarily. In a lot of cases, they perhaps go to the black neighborhood. Isn't the segregation something that has become in part voluntarily?
All right, I didn't see who was trying to get in there first, so I'm just going to go around. Brandon, you're in shot right now, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's insidious. That's the insidious part about. That's what makes it hegemonic. That becomes common sense. It becomes common sense that you'd want to be around people who look like you because they understand you, even though that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't it's white flight. It's gated communities. It's the criminalization of the black youth, especially the black male youth, that makes people feel like a neighborhood is more dangerous just by nature of it having young black men in it, regardless of what they're doing. So they've colonized our minds. That's the end goal of any sort of movement, is to become common sense. Is to make it's to let you choose to self-segregate. But part of that is making people no longer allowed to make that choice and saying we're going to forcibly integrate schools. We did it once. We did it in the 60s. with Little Rock, Arkansas. We're going to do it again because apparently it didn't stick, and we're going to do it right this time.
All right, and I think that the idea of forced integration and how it works and what you need to do to follow up on it to make sure it's actually effective, I think, is something that definitely needs to be exhaustively looked at if that's what we have to resort to in order to make this empathy happen. Go ahead, Adair, get in there. And it looks like Eric, you were trying to maybe speak later, so I'll come to you next.
You asked us when did it become, a minority choice, kind of like when did we just let's move to the black poor neighborhoods as opposed to moving to the white poor neighborhoods. Well, I've got two names for you that will make it, I think, to those of us that are black, I think, at the very least, will deeply understand this, and those names are Jesse Washington and Emmett Till. I think those have become the two people that have really come to represent what it has meant to be black in this country, to the extent that we didn't just, we moved to the poor black neighborhoods, absolutely, because there's other black people there, but because history has shown us what happens when we move to the white neighborhood. History has shown us what happens to a black body, quote-unquote, invading a white space. It's not so much common sense as self-preservation these days. As it is, I am quite honestly afraid. I do not walk around at night very often in this very affluent, very white neighborhood, to the point police to this day will drive in front of my house as slowly as possible and stare me down. I'm put into handcuffs because I quote-unquote match the description of somebody, though I literally could not have been all the way on the other end of Tacoma 5 minutes prior. It is not physically possible for me to traverse from one end of the city to the other in 5 minutes after having just been seen by police. Yet I'm stopped for that. I'm stopped and asked what my name is all the time. Police have come into my home. It's like the Dave Chappelle skit. They have seen my baby pictures on the wall all the way from infancy to graduating high school. They've seen my ID with the address that they knew they were called to at, yet one of them they both said, you know what, we see all this, but we still cannot confirm that you really live here by doing this. So one of us is going to stay inside your home, the place you should feel safe, and you're going to take the other one outside with you, and you're going to lock and unlock the door with the house key that you showed us. That right there makes me not feel comfortable living in a white neighborhood. That right there makes me want to move back to a place where I'm surrounded by communities of color. Not just because my culture is understood, but because, quite frankly, I'm afraid when I see police out here. I'm afraid that I'm not going to survive one of these encounters, and that has to do with the history of being black in the United States. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, look up who Jesse Washington is in Waco. That is the Waco disaster, not what happened with the Branch Davidians, as tragic as that was. Look up the Waco disaster and look up Jesse Washington. Look up who Emmett Till was and understand why we have this fear. But Brandon, go ahead, man.
No, I really want to jump on what you said right there, and I think what you said really encapsulates the response to Black Lives Matters, to the response to Jesse Williams, the response to what happened at the ESPYs last night, and the response from both people on the right and people on the more affluent left to these kind of movements, and why they just don't seem to like it or understand it. And it's the reality is America is just one big safe space. America is just one big safe space for white supremacist thought, and being black in that safe space violates the rules of that safe space. Being black, being too black, indexing race at all in a way that's not sort of, indexing race in a place that doesn't belong. So you're talking about in your office, if you act too black, if you are, if you use slang, if you keep your pants down low, that violates the terms of America's safe space. Black Lives Matter to me is not a movement. It's a counter movement. It's a counter movement meant to correct one of the longest movements in American history, in Western history, white supremacy. And for all of the hoopla about PC culture and safe spaces and all of these things, people are crying their eyes out and scratching their thick monkey craniums trying to figure out how Jesse Williams could say something about black people at a black event. And the truth is because it hurts their feelings. Like their fifis were hurt. It triggers them. It's like they are not used to coming to terms with the idea that whiteness is not something to be inherently valued and blackness is something to be inherently admonished. In America, you can't. It's part of the illusion that if you just behave properly in America and you're black, you too can be President Obama. It's like, no, you can't. It's like part of being the perfect man in America is not being black. that disqualifies you. Perfection, being the perfect woman in America, in American society, is not being black. Like there are things inherent to blackness that disqualifies you from certain things in certain positions in society, whether they be actual positions or just the right to date somebody or the right to be.
Yeah, I want to get Eric in here, but there was something that you mentioned when we were talking before the show about in a previous conversation about what Baldwin said about like the low hum of blackness, and you articulated it in a way that I thought was really good. And I was wondering if you could recall some of that. I can go to Eric if you want to take a moment to kind of get it in your head if you remember what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Give me 1 second. I'll.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Eric, go ahead and get in here and speak on that a little bit.
Well, I kind of wanted to comment about something that Adair said quite a bit ago. The difference in the communities we grew up in. I actually coincidentally had a conversation with Brandon about this. You know, I grew up with a single mom, low income housing my entire life. My little brother had a different dad, and so he grew up in the suburban life and upper middle class, and our viewpoints on America as a whole are entirely different. And it's just amazing to me that like Adair was pointing out, that there's not empathy. How can you look at these situations and not feel empathetic? These are horrible and disgusting, and they're hard for anyone to watch. So how can you still be on the side of the police officers? I can't even wrap my mind around it. How is this even occurring that not everybody is getting behind the Black Lives Matter movement and jumping on the streets? I don't understand.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, one way that they've been able to avoid it is it not directly, like I think we've touched on before, is it not directly impacting their lives as they see it. And so their first impression of how it impacted their life was sitting in traffic and for something that they didn't think was a big deal. And so that's where their engagement starts and stops. And I think that's not helpful, but at the same time I think that people being confronted with that then choose to opine, oh, there's nothing wrong with the police, and then somebody points out, hey, you know, the police don't have to, you know, get questioned about an incident until 24 to 48 hours later, and they're given access to evidence that other people aren't. Well, I wouldn't like that if the police were doing something to me. That doesn't, you know. Or they list another fact about something that's going on that's separate from the racial issues, and I think that gets more people engaged. But I think that doesn't take away from the urgency or the necessity of mentioning the racial angles. And I'm just going to move it over here and get Nis in here. I know it's been a while since he's spoken, so I want.
Yeah, so I would just say, like, with regards to the empathy thing, like, to me, the empathy needs to be built not by someone being murdered. Like, if you have an unarmed man in handcuffs, and really the unarmed part or the handcuffs part should be enough. If you have an unarmed man in handcuffs that gets shot, and then you start thinking, oh, that's too bad. Well, that's the part where you would have empathy for anyone. It's like, no, that is going over the top. The empathy needs to start by saying, this is a person, this is a human being, this is not a dangerous being, this is not because this person has a hoodie. This is about when you get that knee-jerk fear in your gut based off all the bad TV that has indoctrinated you since birth, fighting that. But you can't fight that if you don't have a humanized picture to put on it, and culture doesn't give you. The movie culture and TV series culture of today doesn't give you a humanized picture to relate it to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely accurate. Let's see here. Oh, oof. Dave, I know you've been sitting back there, and I don't know if you're currently around, if you're able to watch, if you've been watching Slack or been watching in YouTube, but if you wanted to get in here and give us some perspective from, I definitely would say, another unique angle that we haven't had covered yet, you can kind of say a little bit about what you said, or what you've heard, and what impressions left with you. And let me just make sure
perspective from the white guy that doesn't really have the problem. You know, it's just the last week or so watching what's been going on, and of course we've been watching it for a while now, a year and a half, and of course there's been no convictions in a lot of this violence and all the violence that's been going on, and it's actually increased the first 6 months of this year, there's more police killings than there was last year. I don't know if Brandon, if that's one of the statistics that you found, but it's my understanding that it's actually increased. So what we're seeing is an increase in the violence against from police, and we're not seeing any accountability. And I think right before Dallas, someone put up a meme that that had a list of all of the black men and women that had been killed by police, and not one conviction. And I just thought to myself, this is not going to go on forever. This can't go on like this forever. Something's going to happen, and don't be surprised if something does. So, and then, of course, Dallas happened. Now we have, of course, an individual. I don't know what we know exact motives are. We taking for granted what we're being told by the investigators on the scene, and I think in a tragedy like that, we tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. At least the media does. So it's been a week where everybody is sitting up and taking notice, including folks like Donald Trump. Their responses aren't necessarily what we want to hear, but I don't know what something that was said in an interview on NPR with Patrice Cullors and Alicia and the other, and I forget her name, the other founder of Black Lives Matter. And the last question they asked was, what do you want, basically? And two things, I think it was Patrice that said, might have been Alicia, that said, basically, we want defunding of police departments that are, having these issues, and also a little truth and reconciliation. And that's always something that's sort of been in the back of my mind, is that this country has never fessed up to what we did as white people, as white Europeans. And South Africa isn't the best. It can be, of course not. Nothing is, but at least they had the guts to actually have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I have a feeling that if it would go a long way if we would actually, stop having a conversation. I like this conversation that everybody wants to keep having. Well, let's converse about that. Let's converse about what this country was built on and admit to it, and maybe then we can start having a conversation about healing those wounds if we admit that we've made those wounds.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a really deep part of it, and I see you, Adair, trying to get in here, so I'll get you in, is that we have to admit about how we got to where we're at. And so, like, when we talked about the stats that I'm going to have Brandon hopefully have a moment to share a few more of them from that he gathered for us, the reason why those stats aren't as high quality as we'd like has a lot to do with who's resisting providing that information. And not just, casually not providing it, but actively resisting making it available. There was recently North Carolina, I believe it was, passed, one of the Carolinas, I think, passed a body cam law, but it came with the caveat of the public not having any access to that video. And so, much like we saw with dash cams, they don't do a very good job of holding people accountable if the people that solely possess them get to determine whether anybody else gets to see them or not.
Right. Washington, D.C. is giving them out to do a study. It's a long study they have to do to find out, with the control group. What, the control group has no cameras and they can beat the hell out of everybody? I don't understand what the study's all about. Give them all the damn body cams.
Yeah. And I mean, if anything, people who have issues with it on an ACLU grounds, I'm willing to hear that out. Like, if I could imagine scenarios where, okay, a husband says that he's going one place, and then a wife goes to find the public access to the body cam of a police officer that was working some Oktoberfest event, and to try and track down her husband at that event. So you've got
Pokemon Go for that. You don't need a body cam.
Yeah, there is interesting aspects of that. So yes, I think that there are some legitimate concerns around that, but that's not what the opposition has been. And so I'll get Adair in here real quickly, and then it looks like Nis wants to speak too. So Nis will come in after Adair and remind everybody who we are and what we're doing here. So go ahead, Adair.
So here's the thing that we talk about, and we talk about empathy a lot, but I think one of the things about that I really appreciate, other than just I love my culture, I love my people, being colored in America, I don't mean that about my Asian, Native, black folks, everybody. I love all of our communities Asian folks, we're all one big family. But here's the thing that I really want to impress upon people. Richard, Nis, Dave, Eric, Brandon, to me, you are all my brothers. And I love you all dearly, not just because I consider you friends and colleagues, but I very much view you, each and every one of you, as a brother. And I view each and every one of you watching this video, regardless of what your gender identity is, as a part of my family, as someone who matters. I love each and every one of you, and I want to make that clear. I want it to be known right now that as much damage, as much pain, and as much hurt as it causes me to pick up the phone after I see these doggone police shootings and go through my contacts, because I cannot bear the idea of texting one of my siblings or my cousins about it, like, hey man, are you alright? I just saw some black kid got shot, waiting for that response, having to call aunties and my mom and my dad and my grandparents. I still love you. I love every single one of you police officers out there, because I know you're doing this, but still, stop killing us. All of you white supremacist folks out there, I still love you. I still love you, and if you ever need somebody to talk to, you ever want that hug, man, I'm here for you. To every single person watching this on YouTube today, to every person that will watch this, I don't care if it's the year 3045 and you're just rediscovering Earth and like, holy crap, what is this idea of when media on this planet changed for the better? I want you to know that I still love you, and that, I think, is the one thing that I can do. I will be militantly pro-person of color. You may best believe that one. But I still love each and every one of you. I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
All right, with that, I don't know if I can give you any more closing comments after that. We're just going to have to leave you, leave that. That was a very powerful and meaningful statement. But I see Brandon wants to get in here, so I'll bring Brandon in. And after Nis goes ahead and reminds us real quickly before we move on where we are, what we're doing, and then I think he wanted to at least, if he can make a brief point, and then Nis is pretty much going to have the ending floor after I get a brief comment from Eric and Dave. So, and that should wrap us up pretty much. So, Nis, if you would, real quickly. After you unmute, of course.
That's because it's secret. So you are watching the Project Sanity show, and we are on the Benjamin Dixon channel, who is very graciously letting us use his channel. We are here with our partners in the project. In Project Sanity, and we have our collaboration with the Progressive Army. You can find me on Twitter at Scandianvia, and you can find Richard on at Progressive Greens. You can find any of the people contributing to this video and any content put in this video, you can find on the links in the description, including their Twitter handles. And if you want to become a grassroots reporter, or if you want to contribute, or you just want to point out that there are stories being missed, there are submission forms in the description, or you can go to our Google Plus community called Project Sanity and find us there and join people in discussing the news, discussing what could be done, discussing solutions. And you can be a part of both this community, and if you want, you can be a part of the project to restore sanity to the media and to the national conversation.
Excellent, Nis. And you had, I imagine, a bit comment that you wanted to make quickly about what we've been discussing.
I would just recommend for perspective for all the white folks watching this. What's being said about white supremacy, they're not saying that you walk around in a KK robe or that you want to walk around in a KK robe. What they're saying is you were born into a system, into a paradigm, into a way of thinking that you yourself didn't have full control over, and that you have been conditioned by society, by TV, by media, to react in certain ways. That is what they're talking about when they talk about this supremacist movement that has been going on in the United States. It is the oppression of one culture by another culture, and you are a, if not willing, then at least an unknowing participant in the suppression. That is what they're saying. So don't get your panties in a bunch. And to the people needing perspective on minorities, I can only say there is on YouTube a beautiful documentary on Native American plight called The Dakota 38. It is so moving and so stirring and puts into perspective any plight and any struggle. of any people anywhere, I would recommend going to watch it. It takes about an hour and 22 minutes, and it's free of charge. So please take that time to go watch that.
Thank you for that, Nis. And I wanted to go ahead and get Eric a chance to give us some closing thoughts. And Dave, you'll be up next if you have something that you wanted to end with. And Brandon, I'll also give you an opportunity for some closing thoughts as well. I see that you're definitely interested. So we'll go with Eric next, and then I'll come to Brandon, and then Dave, you can round us out, and then me and Eunice will carry out the rest of the end of the show.
So I just want to make it very clear that we need to take action on this. Actually, Benjamin Dixon on his show, he had this great moment where he said, "White progressives, get out and do something." And it reminded me of a time where I had a friend who Facebooked me, and she sent me a link to a Black Lives Matter protest event page, and she said, "Eric, I'm too tired. I'm too tired of fighting. Can you please step up for me and make it to this event?" And I took that to heart, and I think that we need to help build a community that everybody can feel safe in. And it's not enough to put a Facebook post up. It's not enough. We need to hit the streets. We need to contact our legislators. We need to try to make something happen, because this has been going on for far too long, and it's sad that the takeover of social media is finally the final straw that's getting people to take action. But I'm happy that at least people are finally starting to take action, but more people need to take action. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you for that, Eric, and I hope many folks take that to heart. And I'm glad that you were able to step up in that situation, and I hope more people follow that example. And Brandon, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Nis said, but give it a little bit more. We've allowed the conversation about racism and what makes someone racist to be dominated by a very small subsection of society. The Democratic Party, white progressives, white elite progressives specifically, and they have decided that racism is something that you are all the time, either because you're from the South, either because you have a drawl, either because you're older than 50, so you grew up in the wrong era, or because you're a Republican, as opposed to racism as something that you do. Racism is something that you do in your everyday life, whether it means that you only ever watch shows with white people in them, whether it means that you inherently distrust black people on the street, whether it means that you inherently find the idea of rap music to be offensive. It is just something that you do. That's the low hum of racism in everyday life that we all contribute to, and that is the larger barrier to solving the racism problem in America, is acknowledging that, yes, we all contribute to it, and then we build these institutions, we write these laws, we do these things that reinforce it, reaffirm racism, shuttle people in these positions where they act the way that we have already decided they act anyway, and that just reaffirms our racist ideas. We have elite Democrats defining racism as something done by the Republicans, while at the same time they call black people super criminals, or destroy welfare reform, or do a myriad things that just devastate communities of color. And it comes time to say, no, just because you're a Democrat does not mean you're not racist. Just because you are 25 and you went to Harvard does not mean you are not racist. Just because you sometimes listen to Drake does not mean you are not racist. You're not contributing to these racist structures. It is about saying that, no, it's about drawing a hard line. And this is why I'm not voting for Hillary Clinton. I'll vote for Jill Stein. I'll write in Ernie from Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street before I vote for Hillary Clinton, because I draw a hard line stance against racism. The same way white progressives feel very comfortable labeling Bernie Bros as sexist and drawing a hard line stance against sexism, I draw that same hard line stance against racism. I say no. I'm saying no to racism. I'm saying no to casual racism, implicit racism. I'm saying no to all forms of racism. And if you feel like it's something that we should live with, then tell me to my face. Say you should be okay with racism and the consequences of it because of X reason. but I'm not. I'm not okay with racism.
I think that's a powerful point, and I wish Nancy Reagan would have made her campaign just say no to racism as opposed to drugs, and then maybe we wouldn't be as far as where we are at now. 'Cause I think we said yes to racism and yes to using drugs as a cudgel to beat that over people's head. Go ahead, sorry.
We said yes to certain types of racism. We said as long as you don't say the N-word, as long as you don't, call them monkeys to their face, it's fine. It's fine. Like as long as we said yes to Donald Trump's racism for a long time.
Yeah.
Until he
on that note, I recently had a Twitter post and somebody posted some link about lynching people and like saying all these types of things and reported it to Twitter, and Twitter was basically like, oh, this doesn't violate our terms of service, and it's just like, yeah. So this type of racism is acceptable. That's just the reality. And like you mentioned, the low hum and just waiting for the other shoe to drop when you're, like you mentioned, we were talking earlier about in being black and white spaces, about how at any moment you're just waiting for everybody to be hyper aware of your blackness and
absolutely
the stress that causes.
I'm sorry, just to close up.
Yeah.
Like I absolutely think Black Lives Matter is working for the exact same reason I think affirmative action is working, because it prevents us from going back into this cycle of perpetration and apology / conversation that America is just in love with. That idea that we just go back to the sort of, well, nothing happens. Then we're awoken by a black person being shot in the gutters, and they go, that's bad. Then we have to have a national conversation. Black Lives Matter prevents that sort of. We can no longer go back to sleep. Affirmative action destroys the illusion of meritocracy, and Black Lives Matter destroys the illusion that things are only bad at certain times, and it makes us all aware of how racism is an everyday aspect of certain people's lives.
Absolutely, and I think we'll be back to talk about this more, but Dave, quickly, if you could get in here in just a really brief moment, like 30 seconds if you got it, just to kind of wrap up your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I just film the cops. Hey, white people, film the cops. Maybe we won't get in trouble, because everybody else that's filming the cops, they're getting in trouble, but maybe we won't. I don't know. I think, from a distance, we've all got phones. Upload it to the live stream. I mean, that's what, look what that young lady did on her Facebook page. So we got to keep them accountable somehow, and obviously the laws are not moving quick enough. So we got to do something. I just want to say I'm looking forward to our Democratic Convention coverage next week. It's going to be a blast. Nis and I back again, the team. So I'm really looking forward to that and being part of the march on the DNC here in Los Angeles on Sunday, and bringing you guys that here on the channel for Project Sanity as part of the coverage. And great show today, guys. Great conversation. Thanks for bringing me in.
Thank you so much. And Nis, if you could keep it real brief, I did want to have a moment of sanity, and I see David has joined us in the back room, so he's going to cut me off at any moment. So if you could be brief, that way I can get it up, I would greatly appreciate that. As soon as you unmute.
That's because it's still secret. So I would just say that the great audience has joined us, and there has been a lively discussion about many things in the chat. And because we've not had any chat moderators on today, unfortunately, we missed a lot of the good comments. Otherwise, we would have brought them into the show. And I would like to plug, like Dave did, our convention coverage starting the 24th. Going on to the 29th. Please join us for that. If you have any things you want to submit, if you have any inside track, or if you just are a person at a demonstration with a camera and you want to show us this, then please do so. With regards to racism, it's true. The conversation has been happening for 30 years, 60 years. It's not changed anything. You have to go do something. Redlining is not okay. It's not okay that other people are deprived of rights that you have automatically. You have to fight it everywhere.
And on that note, on the note of that, this has been a conversation that's been going on for a long time. Just a lot of people have mentioned that people are just bringing this stuff up. I want to just play some from Malcolm X about police brutality for our moment of sanity at the end. So thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully this ends up going out. If not, check it out, Malcolm X Police Brutality. Thanks again for joining us all. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes. I'm just very thankful to be able to do this with y'all.
The police are able to use the press to make the white public think that 90% or 99% of the Negroes in the Negro community are criminals. And once the white public is convinced that most of the Negro community is a criminal element, then this automatically paves the way for the police to move into the Negro community, exercising Gestapo tactics, stopping any black man who is on the sidewalk, whether he is guilty or whether he is innocent, whether he is well-dressed or whether he is poorly dressed, whether he is educated or whether he is dumb, whether he's a Christian or whether he's a Muslim. As long as he is black and a member of the Negro community, the white public thinks that the white policeman is justified